Chapter 25. Harness apples, 19 and 10s. Cattywampus. Yeah, I go sideways. He parked his wagon cattywampus. When the year 1910 arrived, things were prosperous for Searcy County. More iron was being produced in the great mills up north, and American iron furnished all kinds of tools, wares, implements, fence wire, cook stoves, and even tin tobacco cans. Glass and iron were making life much easier and convenient as it became more and more affordable. Few things would be discarded but repurposed and used until it rusted or wore out. Prince Albert tobacco cost 5 cents in the bag and 10 cents in the can. Therefore, the can was reused until someone took it for another use. It was a prize to a child who wanted a purse or bank for valuable keepsakes, and it fit nicely in a pocket. Tins were used for snuff, as 40 million pounds of snuff per year was produced. Many women took to dipping snuff in the era of Jenny Harness. The Dutch traders named the powder used by native Indian snuff. When tobacco was so widely used, it never achieved the sin status of alcohol. For a preacher to condemn the use of tobacco was when he quit preaching and went to meddling. Snuff came in a tin and later in jars that double for drinking glasses. Many families only had snuff glasses to drink from in their home. Snuff tins made good containers for small things like buttons, and boys used the lids for wheels on a homemade wood block car. A small can of snuff conveniently slipped right into an apron pocket along with a pocket knife and a few other handy necessities. Dipping snuff must have brought some degree of satisfaction. Thus the term, "I'm up to snuff," meaning all is good. The automobile was slow to come to rural areas due to the horrible roads. In 1908, Henry Ford's Ford Motor Company introduced the Ford Model T, costing $850. The cost was nearly 1/3 of the price of any other car on the market, but still not cheap enough for the masses. Over the next few years, Ford perfected assembly line production, bringing the cost down to $368 in 1916. The more affordable car would sell hundreds of thousands more than any other company. Yet the mule was the main source of transportation in the Ozarks. Until the roads were improved, the railroad helped to promote travel brochures touting the Ozarks' beautiful scenery and abundant wildlife. The Central Ozarks became popular among hunters, fishermen, and tourists. As the population increased, the pressure on hunting and fishing for food would decimate the abundance of wildlife. The woodland buffalo and the elk were soon all gone, and the white-tailed deer and wild turkey went under great pressure from hunters seeking fresh meat for the table. Sport hunting and sport fishing was mostly a hobby for the rich. In 1910, Jenny turned 76, Billy turned 52, and Riley turned 13 years old. James Riley was the only boy in a family of 6 girls. I'm sure Billy thought long and hard about what kind of farming he could manage with a house of girls. Perhaps that helped him to decide to grow apples. Girls could prune trees and pick apples as well as any man. The rolling land on the mountain farm was ideal for fruit trees, and it sloped to the north, which was also desirable. Coy Taylor, the son of America Harness Taylor, showed a group of us the land in his memory of many apple trees growing on the farm. Coy said that Billy Harness would pick a wagon load of apples and head down to Russellville, Arkansas, to peddle them. He said that Billy would go as far as some mines down toward Fort Smith. Miners liked his apples and bought them from him. Perhaps the mines were coal at Coal Hill in Johnson County. Coy told as soon as Billy sold his load of apples, he would return for another load and go again. Billy probably had a way of storing apples and peddling them in the fall and early winter. Orchards in Searcy County continued to expand as better transportation became available. Railroads now make it possible to ship fruit to markets faster and with less cost. Apples were the most popular to grow as they stored well and made great apple butter, a very popular preserved sauce, when canned. Hard apple cider had been popular ever since emigrants migrated west. It is believed that an Arkansas settler by the name of John Crawford from Benton County in the 1840s developed an apple that would carry the state's name, Arkansas Black. The apple was then widely grown in Arkansas and Missouri and in great demand elsewhere. In 1901, the Arkansas General Assembly adopted the apple blossom as the state's flower. By 1919, the production of apples was 5 million bushels. I have a metal box that has been in the family many years that contained receipts and documents from the late 1890s. Among the items is a postcard addressed to W.A. Billy Harness, shown below. The freight on the fruit trees was $5.25, which would be a lot. In today's worth, it would be $160. This leads me to believe that Billy was receiving a lot of trees in the fall of 1913. By planting trees, he would mow the grass for hay, and a type of grass that was popular is called orchard grass. The grass is aggressive in cool seasons, but goes dormant in warm seasons, which is good timing for fruit trees. Growing pears, peaches, and plums were also popular, as fruit was a real treat and great for bartering. Pears kept better than some fruit did, so when canning became popular, many homes canned peaches and plums in a syrup. Canning factories sprung up near the railroad in some of the rail towns which canned fruit and lots of tomatoes. Tomatoes created a faster cash crop as they could be planted and harvested in 3 months. Also, children could help with growing and picking maters. Many tomato wars took place in the field between kids who wanted to splatter someone with the blood of a tomato. It was cheap entertainment, but never ended well. Another form of entertainment was over in the valley of Richland Creek. A horse racetrack was built so men could race their horses. Horse racing seems to attract betting on a winner and drinking. There was a growing dislike for alcohol by the temperance movement and for gambling. By 1919, there was an amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibiting the manufacturing and sales of alcohol. This put some out of business, but created a new business called bootlegging. The Ozarks had moonshine stills hidden in the hills for years to come. An independent phone system was installed in Richland Valley in the early part of the decade, after the publication of a manual explaining to farmers how they could develop their own telephone systems. Many communities put in their own phones. A phone wire between 2 points with a crank phone at each end allowed you to ring your neighbor and talk. You had to talk loudly and unplug the phone when there was lightning to protect it and your house from damage or a house fire. It was perhaps the first modern appliance that a home had. Using a phone was new, and most folks had no experience at it and needed a lesson on how to use one. Each home had a ring call to let them know if the call was for them or someone else. Long and short rings made by the caller identified the intended home. Maybe a ring call was a short, followed by a long and another short. So you listened to see if it was for you, and often someone would get mixed up and answer it. It was complicated to the average user. When a fellow went to use the phone, they would grab a cylinder-like black thing off a hook hanging on the left side of the box and would hold it by their left hand. Then they would grab a small crank on the right side of the box, spin it clockwise, and a bell would ring at the top of the box. Next, they held the black receiver to their left ear and listened. When a voice spoke, they would speak into the black cone and tell who they wanted to call. After a while, another voice would be heard, and they could talk to them just like they were there. When finished talking, they would hang up the receiver and ring off by giving the crank a half twist. This told anyone on the party line that they were done talking. Thousands of those small telephone systems were installed in many rural communities in the decades to follow. Eventually, they connected with a larger server where a switchboard made the connection. If you ever watched The Andy Griffith Show, you have seen them request a call to Sarah, and she would connect the call. Listening in to a call that wasn't for you was known as eavesdropping. A lot of gossip got started that way. Folks were getting out more to attend a picnic, a political speech, some music, or a dance. A few church buildings were being built, and the Methodists and Baptists put some nice facilities in Leslie and Marshall. As schoolhouses were built, they were used for school, social events, and meetings. Both a church house and a schoolhouse were a gathering place in the community, and while some of the time it was for religious services or educational purposes, it was also for singings and picnics called dinner on the ground. Music with instruments and dancing was frowned upon by many conservative Christians and was usually held in private locations. The market for oak timber allowed for many farmers to cut or haul logs to local mills and earn some cash. The extra money for necessities sometimes was more than enough, and conveniences, such as a battery phone or battery radio, were added to the home. Having a little extra money gave a sense of security that the poor people had never had before. Some put their savings in the bank, and others hid it on the farm. Few carried any money on them except to use it for a purchase. Most who had been dirt poor had become just poor. Reflection. Jenny Harness became known by friends and neighbors as Aunt Jenny. It was a term of respect for an older woman who was a widow. Auntie was an affectionate term for the same. She was also Granny to those grandchildren who now ran around her legs. She had lived long enough to see that her endurance and faith had found favor with her God. Life was still hard but rewarding. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Proverbs 31:25-27. Some Baptists were known as Landmark, and the Church of Christ were known as Campbellites. The early church also faced challenges from the Campbellite movement, as well as a growing acceptance of the landmark doctrine. The landmark movement would later cause a severe split within the Southern Baptist denomination. The Campbellite movement arose on the southern frontier around 1800 as an effort to abandon denominationalism, to put it simply and incompletely. This new movement was welcomed by many Baptist congregations. The First Baptist Church formed in Little Rock was taken over by the Campbellites in 1832, renouncing their creed, rules of decorum, their name, and every other appendage of human invention. Early Baptist church discipline seems awfully strict by modern standards. Non-attendance was frowned upon. One Little River County church excluded members who missed more than 3 consecutive services. Profanity could bring exclusion, as could drunkenness, marital infidelity, and other offenses, such as dancing. However, restorations were common too. In 1880, 460 members were excluded. 298 were restored to full membership.